Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last in our series of A+D Mondays. It's a thrill to have you here. I appreciate, for those of us who are teaching here at Berkeley, we're in the midst of launching final exams and final projects. So things are exciting on a lot of different fronts. It's wonderful to have a conversation here that's a culmination of a residency with the incredible duo Bull.Miletic. A bit of background, as some of you know from other of our gatherings, when we're trying to offer this kind of forum as a place to engage arts, design, and all varieties of creative fields in the wider research culture of the university, there's a precedent for thinking about that and rubrics for thinking about what that conversation is. One dominant way of framing and describing conversations across disciplines in the arts is follows under this acronym STEAM. Some of you may have heard or think about the role of the arts in engaging STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And one of the big things that we think about a lot amongst all of our colleagues is how much Berkeley has been working it dynamically on the STEAM front long before the acronym STEAM had been created. And tonight's exchange and tonight's presentation offers us a way to think more about how. So when we think about Bull.Miletic, these are people who were actually featured earlier a few years ago in what I think of as one of the key prescient gathering spaces for thinking about arts and technology, our Art, Technology, and Culture Colloquium, which is now lodged inside of A+D Mondays, founded by Professor Ken Goldberg. Bull.Miletic were speakers in that series because of their probing engagement with new technologies and new art forms, often engaging social dynamics in very interesting and provocative ways. They have now returned this fall semester as artist in residence, I should say inaugural artist in residence in our Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society. And we're thrilled to have colleagues at that center who thought that it might be interesting and wonderful to have artists in residence with them. So when I think about the STEAM conversation, I often the art-STEM relationship happens in one but only one direction. On the one hand, you can think of the artists are involved with our researchers in STEM laboratories to produce amazing, compelling visualizations of discovery across science, technology, engineering, and math. So the artists and the designers become, you could say, the communication platform for disseminating and inspiring engagement with scientific discovery. Or you can think about it from another direction, that artists are occupying labs across campuses and other places and having a catalytic function in helping and thinking with scientists and engineers about new forms, about new uses that perhaps they hadn't thought of. Usually people choose one or the other, or can only be framed one or the other, and I think the great thing about this team is how much they occupy both positions. They think deeply with STEM colleagues about new forms of technology that track and gauge and monitor society. And they also think about how to communicate that and about how to reuse and redirect those technologies. Throughout the semester, they have been particularly focused on a particular domain of technology, the aerial view or aerial technology. What does it mean when we have, whether it drones or other forms of sensory technology, offering us an aerial view, and often an aerial view in motion of a world beneath? What does that mean for how we understand a map, for how we understand the cartographic imagination? What does that mean for the ethics of how we track or manage or disseminate information about the world below? So they've been thinking about this relationship too in terms of also how it changes visual art, of how it changes what we think cinema is, how it changes the art forms as well. So I hope you'll help me welcome people who are innovators in STEM fields and innovators across art fields. Bull.Miletic, who will share with us the latest in their own discoveries. Thank you.
thank you very much, Shannon, for this very nice introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. Thank you all wonderful people at Art Research Center and Systems for co-hosting us here at UC Berkeley. Thank you also to the larger UCB community for contributing immensely to our research here this semester. Our residency has been a very fruitful journey, and we're excited to be able to share some of our work in progress with you here tonight. Tonight's presentation will start and end with a film. The first one you see here documents the installation Heaven Can Wait. This is from our earlier artistic research project. Heaven Can Wait is relevant in two ways to our current research. It concentrates on the aerial view in motion, and it employs kinetic projection. The key focus of our work in general can be broadly defined as an investigation into the ongoing cinematification of everyday life. By tracing the revolving restaurant's scenic dream and panoramic desire through a genealogy of the moving and projected image, the Heaven Can Wait project proposes a 360-degree revolving view as a ready-made cinema, or what we call a cinema trouvé, a specific cinematic experience outside the normative cinematic apparatus.
In this project, the revolving restaurant is treated as an optical device, where the attributes of an elevated view and mechanical motion evoke a unique cinematic experience. In the ongoing process of documenting the 360-degree moving views from the growing number of revolving restaurants around the world, we have studied this unique architectural phenomenon through video, photography, and text since 2001. Specifically designed for our exhibition at Kino Art Center in Norway, 24 slowly revolving projections display a selection of 24 views in their original speed and direction, periodically overlapping and dissolving, forging a dynamic assemblage of natural and urban landscapes.
While the Heaven Can Wait project investigates the cinematic contingencies within architectural design, our current artistic research project on the aerial view in motion explores the cartographic genealogy of the aerial moving image. The extraordinary combination of moving image and flight can be traced back to the beginnings of cinema, when Lumiere brothers brought their cinematograph into a tethered balloon ride. The current intensification of aerial imaging, remote sensing, and computer modeling, and the environments these technologies control and produce, is the foundation for our research. In this presentation, we conclude and reflect on our own artistic countermapping projects and strategies as methods for breaking away from stable categories and challenge established conventions.
The current proliferation of the aerial moving image across practices and fields powerfully contributes to the massive technological distribution of perception that shapes our contemporary visual paradigm. However, this new paradigm is not primarily, as many have claimed, a transition from linear to vertical perspectives. Most importantly, rather, we see an unprecedented dynamization of technological flights, combining proximity and distance. This is evident in the extended use of computer modeling, fly-through maps, and dronematography in mainstream film, architecture, and computer games, as well as in the surge of observation wheels across so-called world-class cities.
The aerial image today involves multiple sensor and mapping techniques, where digital environments are made up of data sets translated into wireframes and composite assemblages. In this way, the aerial view in motion presents a dynamic and intensified panoptic and predicting vantage point for the beholder, a vantage point that have access to details and overview in the same image.
Our claim is that the combination of proximity and distance, what we refer to as proxistence, presents space as a model. This exponential intensification of age-old mapping and cartographic techniques draws on a cinematic model of attention and spectacle to enforce spatial dominance and control. Through the prism of contemporary art, media archaeology, and the intertwined genealogy of cartography and optics, artistic research project sets out to offer an updated account of the aerial moving image through the production of artworks that take up the artistic and activist tradition of counter-mapping projects.
So, one of our works developed within the Aerial View in Motion project is Vanetti. This work was commissioned for the Research Pavilion at this year's edition of Venice Biennial, from where it traveled to Anglim Gilbert Gallery in San Francisco.
And so in this project, we take Jacopo de Barbaris, Vanetti, a famous woodcut from 1500, as a starting point to explore the document's historic cartographic principles of composite imaging and spatial control, while shedding light on its newly scanned material life as an assemblage of digital microtemporal events.
As an impressive amount of scholarship have shown, the Barbaris map was a composite image stitched together from numerous partial views. Such partial views were already digitized by way of triangulation and consequently mechanically reproduced and manipulated into one synoptic image, whose sheer size and amount of detail was able to evoke in viewers an experience of virtual reality.
Although the Venice Project Center goes a long way in reproducing a Google Maps-like interface, you see here, for the online version of Vanetti, our project attempts to talk from the life of an artwork and its continued modulation through a variety of infrastructures, eventually ending up as an event of electromagnetic pulsation.
The key to our interest in Barbaris Vanetti is its implied motion, visible in the multiple perspectives within the fantasy projection. The map exhibits a dynamic overview from combining multiple perspectives as it assembles viewpoints from the town's 103 clock towers. However, as the scan of the paper map entails, another motion is currently underpinning its translated existence, evoking the instability of networked digital archives, whose material structure is that of vectorial dynamics and electromagnetic fields. While the web page toolbar allows one to download what is currently visible, the downloaded image is not quite what one sees in the web browser.
The online version of Vanetti is a composite of 14,196 discrete image tiles that make up the Barbares digitally encoded map. These tiles are organized in a grid of 169 columns and 84 rows. Each tile is a 256 by 256 pixel image. Inspecting a downloaded section of the map, we can see that the algorithm in the downloaded function produces a PNG which populates 256 by 256 tiles in a 128 by 128 pixel grid without resizing them. The result is a defected map displaying only a quarter of a tile, i.e. 3/4 of each image tile remains obscured.
When downloaded section by section from the online server in full resolution, the resulting composition resembles not the bird's eye view of a systematic access and navigation, but the topological space of a computational process repeatedly executing a glitch. As is visible when downloading the map tile by tile, the digitized Vanetti is distributed across multiple online servers, random access memory.
After having completed the full download of the glitched map, we designed 2 additional bugs to reflect the original map's 3 versions. The glitch is the starting point for understanding the difference between the material base of the map's physical paper version created in 1500 and its contemporary online existence as electronic pulsation.
Historically, it can be argued that the power of the aerial view is closely linked to its cartographic abilities, that is, to providing a contextual overview. This is where aerial view has generated its paramount historical significance, from planning and redevelopment to geopolitics and war. This is also the domain to which artists and activists have engaged in counter-mapping projects.
As noted by Deleuze and Guattari and many others, representation is not a second-grade reality, but has an active role in the continuous construction of it. In this active sense, the function of mapping is less to mirror reality than to engender the reshaping of the worlds in which people live.
So in this project, our main method is to open up a dialogue between the aerial moving image and the cartographic map by rethinking cinecartographic relationships across scholarly and artistic practices. Our task is double-pinched. We first treat cinema as cartography in order to theoretically extend and modulate the recent preoccupation with spatial models of the moving image. Secondly, we employ a media archaeology of cartographic expressions in order to open a historical investigation on aerial imaging with media theoretical implications. This is a little excerpt of a longer video that you'll see here.
And finally, Zoom Blue Dot, the project that we have been working on here at UC Berkeley during the past semester. That is still in progress, and it will be completed for the Metamorph Biennial of Art and Technology in Trondheim in Norway next March.
On February 14, 1990, before permanently turning off its cameras, Voyager 1 turned towards Earth to snap one last picture. Shot from a distance of 4 billion miles, Earth appears as a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam. Voyager's last picture essentially mapped the entire globe into a crescent only 0.12 pixels in size.
Today, the aerial view is in motion, not only through the physical attachment of cameras to mobile machines, but most prominently in the way these technological mediations are distributed and networked between billions of portable electronic devices, merging news feeds and entertainment with the intelligence operations.
The exponential growth of orthomapped representation of Earth through cinematized datasets produce effective, scalable models of our planet, far from the vibrant ecosystems that in Buckminster Fuller words, spins in space, traveling 60,000 miles an hour in the midst of rich non-human life, as well as the intensive relations to other planets and the Sun. As evident in the growing field of spatial data visualization, a model limits complexity in order to discern a current trend or predict a future scenario. Following Bruno Latour's concept of design, Zoom Blue Dot project questions the agency of these Earth models and their production of worldviews.
Addressing the concept of scale as an epistemic shift in our awareness brought on by the Anthropocene, Zoom Blue Dot is in dialogue with artistic counter-mapping projects such as Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson on the one hand, and the visual communication research conducted by Ray and Charles Eames in their classic Powers of 10 on the other.
As opposed to Eames's camera that travels through the galactic constellation back to Earth's surface and into the molecular structure of a human body, our camera zooms into the pale blue dot, displayed on a smartphone screen, and penetrates into the fabric of the electronic image material support. In this case, the multi-layered assemblage that constitutes the liquid crystal display.
So, what Shannon briefly mentioned, aside from this wonderful opportunity to interact in this extraordinary community of practitioners and scholars, one of the most exciting parts for us was access to scientific facilities and receiving enthusiastic support for our artistic project. Here we see Holly Aaron at Molecular Imaging Center carefully preparing the smartphone for its close-up.
In our artistic research practice, we consider technology an equal player in our work. And our aim is to bring forth its affordances and agencies in our increasingly globalized environment. It is always important for us to emphasize that the artwork emerges between processes and brains in assemblages of networked feedback loops between human and non-human entities.
Every practice concerns the modes of thought. To start with practice means to address the problem artistically. Thinking through practice means grasping topics more intuitively to allow for other types of connections to appear and flourish.
And here we see yet another laboratory environment that we were so lucky to be working in, observing the skillful sample preparation by Daniel Jorgens at the Electron Microscope Lab.
And these are the layers of the dissected smartphone LCD, ready for their close encounter with the electron beam in the vacuum chamber.
The artwork emerges as a diagram across dissimilar and disparate analogies, forging new ways of addressing questions and ultimately new ways of thinking. Here we are pushing the logical brain to the back as we work with sensibilities such as pattern recognition and new forms of abstraction within strictly artistic logic. Like this, we try to hark back to the wonders of perception, through a process of unlearning conventions and tropes by trying to see them anew.
Yet another picture from an array of interactions on campus. Here we are at the Citrus Invention Lab with Chris Myers in the earliest stages of brainstorming on the robotic component of the work, of the installation that we are developing, namely the battery-powered rover that will be transporting the projector on its continuous travel through the exhibition venue.
The history of mapping is a history of territorial claims. Digital imaging is itself essentially a process of mapping, a conversion of electromagnetic radiation into discrete electric pulses, organized in a grid of pixels. Informed by scholarly and artistic practices across the aerial view, cinema, cartography, and contemporary art, our project mobilizes counter-mapping strategies as a way to reapproach and make visible the everlasting grid, equally underpinning cartography and aerial moving images alike.
As Bruno Latour reminds us, the globe of globalization is both too small and too big. How does Earth correspond to the images we make of it? How can we depict alternative futures when the imaging technologies we have at our disposal follow the grid system of the disappearing globe? How can counter-mapping specific imaging technologies provide for new spatial ontologies? And finally, we would like to present
a little preview of the video that we've been developing here. That will eventually be a little longer than we'll see here, and we'll be traveling in the exhibition on the robotic device that you are seeing very early beginnings of in these images. So
yeah, so that's about 12 minutes long, and if we could have lights a little bit darker, that'd be great. Maybe?
He's working on it.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1.
There's no sound yet.
Yeah.
So, now we have a little time for some questions.
Anybody?
If somebody has some questions, this completes the end of our presentation.
Works. There's one.
Yeah. We have one there as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I wonder if you could spend a few moments talking about the nature of your collaboration and how you conceive of it conceptually, but also logistically. I'm always really interested to hear about divisions of labor with collective practices.
Yeah, sure. As we sort of said somewhere in the text, we really think of the work as emerging from within a structure of different types of agencies and processes. So we don't really feel like the work belongs particular to anybody, but we somehow were interested in similar interests. Yeah, we had similar interests when we met at the San Francisco Art Institute in 2000. And we, particularly, I guess, in technology and the way technology sort of plays a role in the way we structure and think. And so to bring that forth in the work itself is something that we share. And yeah, so we met, we started collaborating, and eventually we became a couple. It took a long time before we realized that. We were kind of keeping an arm's length distance because the collaboration was going very well. So we didn't want to, bother the collaboration with romance. But now we have collaborated for 17 years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, to answer the logistical part, it goes kind of both directions. Sometimes it's kind of, if you think of effectiveness, it oftentimes, one can think about, okay, you're two, so you're more effective, but actually realize very early on that this is actually not the feature that is really important and relevant to the collaboration. And another thing, you mentioned the word collaboration, and I think that this is something that we are trying to leave as much as possible. We like to say that we work together, because collaboration is exactly, what your question was leading into, like, division of labor and like kind of responsibilities. And this is something that we just cannot relate to. So it's like, and as we like to say, we are like not 50-50, but 100-100. So, yeah.
So basically we do everything together. We sit next to the computer and push buttons together, and we film together, and we write together, and we do everything together. And that's exactly why it's not more effective. It's actually super non-effective. But that's the way it is.
Thank you for your powerful work. I wanted to know if you had any more recommendations, or kind of speaking to like what canon or school of thought you're responding to. You mentioned Robert Smith really quick, and just like, yeah, speaking to what is the legacy of counter mapping activism work. And I do a lot of my own mapping with the Caribbean and trying to think through colonialism, and I'm just looking for more people who are using mapping as a decolonial practice. So if you have any recommendations, that'd be cool.
Sure, yeah. Counter mapping is a really loaded term, and there's a lot of practices and political connotations to it. But for us, it really has to do with technology and the grid that is underpinning the technological image, and the way that grid resembles the grid in cartography, and how longitude and latitude and other ways of mapping and translating one image or one pattern into another pattern via systematized grid structures. And yeah, so it's really, in our sense, a counter mapping of a imaging technology that we're talking about here. But we do reference particularly in another talk that we do, we draw situationists in the way they break apart the plan of the Paris that was Haussmann's construction, and so it's definitely something that can be brought more forth, the history of countermapping, and maybe we're sort of like just starting it, and we can get back to it more as we go forward in this project. It's still kind of fairly new. As we mentioned, we worked a lot with cinema and architecture before, so it was really about like the constructed space of infrastructure and building rooms, and the way that architecture is a 3D element that you have to walk around and be an itinerant body around something in order to really experiencing it. And so to connect the itinerant body to a kind of cinematic voyage from the early, high vantage points that one was traveling to before cinema came along. And so, picturesque gardens and, all the idea of like the view, the connection with the view and the movement of the body. So that is kind of like our past work, and now we're sort of entering into a kind of cartography and mapping, and so we'll get to maybe more of that reference as we go along.
But mostly through historic avant-garde. Like I
Sure,
can
yeah.
just think about Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. He's definitely one of the big references for us, and his cinematic work particularly.
Yeah, the movement that you used in the video I found quite effective, of going from something coming very far away, coming towards us, and then realizing that for me as an audience member, moving towards that, and then the overlap where they switch and move, I thought was quite nice and very effective. I had a very specific question about where one of the images came from in that, where you had a picture, an image, digital image of the Earth that almost, from where I could see it, it looked as if it was, I couldn't quite detect, how the drawing that was done on that globe that was moving. Where's that from? Did you?
Are you talking
That's
about?
a secret.
Because it's amazing. Because it's
Are you talking at the beginning of the video or at the end of the video?
it's actually at the end. It comes in towards the middle. You see it a little bit, where it's almost like it's been feathered around the globe. It's like a digital image of white marks around where the continents would be. And
Shall we get to it? So that's a Dürer's
there you go.
This?
woodcut.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Dürer's woodcut from 1515. This is Johannes Stabius' globe made by Dürer in 1515. And what we've done is we just vectorized it and inverted black. We created a white drawing on a black background, and his print is, needless to say, black on white paper. So that's the origin of this image.
Because it looks like the Earth turned into text somehow. It's really, anyway, it's a very nice image. Thanks.
Yeah.
First two comments. I love that you went to a square. Like, I feel so dominated by the rectangle, and that was the way that the screen closed, that. And but I'm wondering, you brought up questions that are very important. You brought up particularly ways that this work will change perception, in a sense, change knowledge, or the way we get to knowledge. So I'm curious, as artists, what are there moments that you're still working on, or what kind of changes happen? I mean, I'm coming from dance and performance, so I mean, I see these micro changes every day. But I'm curious, in working with this, what are some of those ahas you've had?
Well, I can just say something that might be an answer to the question, or I would try to offer an answer to this. One is that this is not, we don't look for an aha moment to begin with. But
Yes, we do.
okay, well, all right.
I can start with one aha moment.
Okay, but I wanted to say that actually that this is that there's another component which you just briefly mentioned, and that's the kinetic projection part. And in that sphere, in that environment, is where we expect most transformation to happen and most possibilities to open.
Well, I think this last project particularly has a lot of aha moments, but I think maybe aha moments for us work very. It's a very important part because we definitely don't write the scripts. We don't have a clear idea what we want to do before we do it. We really work with the machine.
That's
and
a wow effect. That's not aha.
Oh, wow and aha. So by sort of having a loose idea where you want to go, then assembling things, looking at it, really sort of like try to. That's what we also said about pushing the logical brain to the back, and really try to look for patterns, look for recognition, look for things that work, and we don't know why it works. It just works, and then we can go back and theorize it later, and we can know exactly why it works. But at that point, we really have to be sort of like sensory perception at the front. One thing that really happened in this work was with the circle that we really, in some sense, didn't think so rationally about, but then changing its size and moving it in and out, we found out it actually references in a very big way the work of EMSs, because they constantly zoom in and in and in with their square, and they have a kind of numerical countdown because they do powers by 10, so they constantly inform you how far or how big the zoom is. So our circle is much more kind of intuitive and maybe abstract, but it still has that reference of kind of zooming in, coming from nowhere and zooming in. So your sense of scale in some sense, and the sense of kind of enclosing the words into something that can be measured and scaled, and then in some sense pointing to a place at Earth eventually. And then another thing that also is with the circle is that it was part of the first image that was on Voyager, because Voyager has a plate of images, and the circle is used as a reference for calibration. So it's sort of like, and we didn't, that's something that sort of we found out afterwards, like, oh, there's another reason for why it's interesting to have the circle there, so there's a bunch of, so this is, so we really sort of, on this stage when we start video editing, it's really a lot of aha and a lot of trying to find out how it's going to be interesting to put it together, and then, with a loose idea of what we want to achieve, but not, in any sense, a strict script. And it's by no means done right now. It's still evolving.
Convincing.
Should I start? Sure. It's really
So
beautiful.
I'm not quite sure how to formulate this question, but when you were talking about longitude and latitude, and at one point people were sailing all over the planet and they didn't know about longitude. It was just latitude, and yet they were making these incredible voyages. So, and artists have a way of describing the maps or the experiences of people. So how would you see your activity, the counter mapping, to influence people's activities? So that's my first question. And the second is, I've been in many situations where there are artists and scientists collaborating, and the artists seem to have more of an openness to what is possible and is not necessarily data driven, and yet you're using the tools of data. So how do you see your work influencing scientists?
It's a tough question. Do you want to?
I thought something that you were going to say something first. The first question was about how artists, or I guess how we were traveling the Earth without longitude. And the other was about how artists are making maps. Was that it?
Counter maps.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard to, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say that, one thing with art is that it's not that measurable in a sense. So it can't, that's one thing that art does. It doesn't let itself being measured or defined. And I like always to refer to our professor, Paul Koss, at the New Genres Department, when people asked him, but what is new genres? What is the department? What is its goal? What are the sort of categories of art that you work there? And he's constantly kind of replying, well, once you define new genres, you lose it. You know, it kind of slips away. So I don't know in which way artists can, you know, have a specific effect on science. Perhaps it would be hard to sort of measure exactly in quantifiable ways, but I'm convinced that it's a fruitful, you know, way of continue, because I mean, you can do this kind of like large scale thoughts about how rational thought and progression in science led to Second World War. So after Second World War, we had modernist art and modernist cinema. You know, the belief in rationality sort of broke down a little bit, because, you know, in the end we didn't sort of solve the major problems of preserving our planet, living in harmony, thinking ecology. So perhaps artists can, in some sense, bring that forth, that idea of thinking ecologically, thinking processes outside of real, quantifiable, always for profit or less measurable units. I don't know. It's very cheesy, but in some sense, I don't know. Do you have anything else? I think, you know, I think it's in some sense our metaphor for digital imaging too. It's the way that it's sort of premised on the grid. So if we, you know, if we're looking for another way of imaging in the digital realm, how can we do that when we're still always within the grid, you know? So that's kind of that's something that we're struggling with, because there isn't a way, in some sense. But we still, maybe it's a poetic construction of thoughts that there, you know, that needs to be countermapped, or it needs to, in some sense, be probed.
Yeah, so it's really beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how the robotics angle is going to be worked into your show that you're doing in a few months.
Well, I mentioned it earlier in response to your question, but this is something that we haven't seen, really. We haven't experienced. That's maybe that kind of, you know, like maybe that's an aha moment, or a wow, or I don't know, that will really occur once this thing starts living. At this point, there are some speculations which I don't think are very interesting. I mean, there's like, this is really kind of, you know, what Sine earlier mentioned, is kind of based on intuition, is like kind of, okay, we have some experiences from before, and this is how we started this presentation with the Heaven Can Wait project, where we were really motivated to think in those terms, but we are not reproducing the same machinery, but kind of we are thinking in the same way, and hoping that this is going to be something that is going to open up a new possibilities. So concretely how it's going to work, there's a large exhibition venue which where we will be projecting this probably a little bit updated version of this, or worked out on a rover that we briefly flashed, that will go in a certain trajectory through space. So, and that's what we are expecting to happen, is that this image will be, you know, projected in space in such a way that, you know, the image grows and shrinks as the projector moves away or towards the, you know, some of the walls in the venue. So it's really hard to describe, but I'm really looking forward to see it myself. Yeah. I mean, this is really, I think that this is the first time that we've seen this in kind of, you know, a large, on a large screen today. So a lot of things are kind of still opening up for us.
Yeah, the main intention that we're thinking now in terms of robotics is to make that square image change size. So as we zoom in, it's either going to sort of be smaller or expand, hopefully expand to encompass the entire room, so the spectator would be completely immersed in some abstraction of projection, even maybe casting shadows, something like that, and then zooming out or in, we have to experiment with that, it becomes a little dot on the wall. So again, sort of trying to work with the idea of something that's fixed and bring it into
So
motion.
basically, to amplify this idea of penetration, this was earlier mentioned, this kind of travel through space, by physical travel through space of a projected image. So that's kind of the basic idea.
We'll travel to the phone space of the layers inside the LCD screen.
Well, first, I greatly enjoyed the abstraction and the way the glitch and the patterns, and then there were a moment where images speed up and they flipped, and I was wondering, well, how that it's completely disoriented my emotion, my brain, and my feelings. So I was wondering if that being tested and how our system reacts to that. So my question will be, what's triggered this project and how you guys became to collaborate with UC Berkeley and bringing art to science and to exploring this through our physical bodies and motions. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting to us too that this happens with moving image. And in the end, we've had moving image for more than 100 years, where we still react to them very physically. And we can sit in a cinema and look at a roller coaster ride, and we bodily feel that we are on that ride. We're not able to tell our brain that we're not on the ride. We can somehow rationalize it behind our experience, but stomach-wise and sensorially, we are on that ride. So this is something that we're really interested in and really investigate that idea of, that is the main interest of why we're working with the moving image, because precognitively, it constitutes perception. And somehow I think it's relegated, the idea of that the image actually moves, and the idea that there's a diagram in sort of temporality between still images that sort of translates into movement with our perceptual system. That diagram between the machine and the human body, the organic and the technological, the way that works together, it's fascinating, and it's still not exactly explained in scientific way either. It's still a little bit sort of, perception is really a huge field, and it's the way that the brain works to compute images is still in the way, it's something that we take for granted every day, but we like to sort of hark back to that wonder of perception, that we actually have the affordance of seeing something that people call illusion of movement. But we think about it as an affordance also. So it's a big part of our work. It was addressed particularly in the Revolving Restaurant project, because it really had to do with the idea of both stability and instability. I mean, the overview, that you have an overview and you kind of feel like you see everything and you're in control. At the same time, you're emotionally dizzy, and it's too much information and it's too much movement, and you feel maybe a little bit, So, it's these complex feelings that you get from the aerial view in motion that somehow pinpoints the moving image experience in some sense. So, yeah, it's. Well, we are in a research program right now in Europe, in Norway, where you do a 3-year artistic research project within an educational institution. So we are actually on a kind of exchange between that project and UC Berkeley, in some sense. So we are sort of funded by Norway, but we were sort of able to do our one part of our research here. So, yeah, that's how that came together.
But I mean, it's not a coincidence that we are here. I mean, this is like, you know, something that, I mean, we used to live in Bay Area. Our collaboration started at the San Francisco Art Institute. And we were, of course, very familiar with this environment, and, you know, we were, you know, looking for opportunities to, you know, come back and, you know, do something like this here.
Okay, since we have, I think, people starting to leave now, the entire series has been on the theme of public reassembly, and I feel that you've offered us another set of data points for thinking about what we mean by that term, both aesthetically and socially, and certainly technologically. So thank you for doing that. I also want to tell the group here that if you're not signed up for our newsletter, go to artsdesign.berkeley, artsdesign.berkeley.edu. And on December 15th, we'll be releasing a whole new fleet of A+D Mondays, a whole new fleet of programming on Wednesdays at noon, and you'll get a pick, and I hope you'll put them on your calendar. For now, help me thank these two incredible people for closing out 2017 for us.